special meeting to order.
When?
Hello?
Hello.
Hey, Michael.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay, we just called the meeting to order, so how long of discussion do you think we'll need?
Let's start with 15 minutes and see where we are.
15, okay, do I have a motion to go into executive session for 15 minutes?
Second.
Moved by Cale, second by Justin, with all, everybody, with Tyler and then Michael on the phone to resume at 7:15.
Is this attorney-client privilege?
Yes.
For, then the subject,
Uh,
potential litigation like the last time? Okay.
Yep. We're out of executive session, no decisions were made. Do I hear a motion to go back in for another 15 minutes?
Second.
Moved by Larry, second by Cale, all in favor? Okay,
Coming out at,
coming out at 7:30.
33.
We're out of executive session, no decisions were made. Do we hear a motion to go back in for 5 minutes?
I didn't
Moved
hear.
by somebody, second by somebody.
I need to know.
Larry,
Larry,
Justin, Kay.
coming out at
Coming out at
He said
7:41.
7:41.
We're out of executive session, no decisions were made. Dan, Tyler, who's up? You dropped your pen, Tyler. Underneath the chair there.
I need these back. I need the card.
Now I have to send that. Yeah, there you go. I don't remember, I think it was 8 or 10 copies, I don't remember.
I think they had the other titles, so I'm sure that they went back. Huh? Well, there should be 9, I think. I don't know.
So you should have a map, 5-page cost estimate, and then, 3 more additional. Okay, the color-coded map is kind of the priority list of the streets that Dan had sent me. We have a 1, 2, 3 priority, 1 being the highest. Those are kind of color-coded. And the big 5-page cost estimate is the whole, every single street on the map. That's everything combined. So the sticker shock on that's about 3.6 million.
That's all 3 of these?
Yes, that's everything on the map. That's everything that's colored on the map. Ballpark.
Yes, everybody's got
And that has some combination of some full depth replacement and no overlay kind of thing on the street.
For 4 or 3.
3 priorities
Missing one.
and then 1 big small street.
Yeah, number 2, number 3, and the overall.
Missing number 1.
There may not have been enough to go around, I think we're making copies.
I got 1.
Number 1, it seemed like there maybe weren't as many copies, but we can make one. Was there just not enough to go around?
Does everybody have 1, 2, and 3?
No.
I have 2 and 3 and the preliminary.
I didn't realize they were, we've got all ones down here.
Oh.
Oh. There's the ones.
Here, here's some ones.
I got some more ones here, Tyler.
Okay.
You have 1? Yeah, thanks. Anyone else need a 1?
No, I got a 1.
Do you need a 2 or a 3?
Mm-hmm.
Need 2 or 3.
I need my reader. Yeah, see that's there too.
Just, you, I can get copies from him later.
I got 3 here.
That's, I'll just take it.
good?
That's
You can
okay.
get a copy later.
Mhm.
Okay, so then we can kinda go down on the priority list. So we'll start with number one. Those are the reds. That was listed on your sheet that was provided as the worst ones. Just a couple comments. So Quincy Street from Whittier to North, 6-inch asphalt. Right now, it's an existing gravel street. I don't know if that was the intention, just to pave the gravel, or if that was an error on there. I just wanted to double check on that. You guys were thinking to pave that gravel street? There's like storage units right on the east side of it.
yeah.
Is that down by
Which
John?
one, Todd?
Well, close.
Quincy Street, it's
It's a
this one up
block
here,
over.
Quincy from Whittier to North.
Oh, okay.
It's next to the storage units.
Yeah, there's storage units on the east side of it.
Yeah, that's,
I don't
Yeah.
remember that being.
it's never been.
It's never been done. It's,
That
Correct.
was, I was gonna say, that wasn't on our list, was it?
Yeah,
It was on the list.
it was on the first one on the
'Cause I
back.
looked when it finished.
It was the first one on the back from Quincy, Whittier to North.
Larry? That's you.
Who's handwriting?
That's mine. I know how English you know.
So I can take it off. I was a question because it's gravel, so I just wanted to double check on that.
I think we just put it on there because we were looking at the total scope.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as it being a top priority, I would say
So probably not.
no.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
And the other one was Second Street, right?
Yeah, second. What was that? Second from
Or was it this one?
River
that
to-
was-
River to Valley.
Oh,
That's also
instead.
gravel.
Cause that was the one that was supposed to be done
Mhm.
before in the
Yeah, it was
first
supposed to be
project.
done before.
Which one?
That one. It was up there.
Yeah, the green.
But it
Green.
came,
Yeah, but I have
I'm already
three
through
right now.
But it was in the
Did we come
first
all the way down to
project.
we cut it
So I
the
wonder if
first
you guys
project,
meant
right?
that instead.
Yeah, we cut it.
we cut it.
Yeah, we
but
cut
did-
that last block off at North End.
But did it go all the way to Whittier?
Did we cut 2 blocks when we
We
did that?
cut 2 blocks. didn't
Oh, was
we?
there two? Oh, okay.
I was trying to remember, I'm trying to figure out how well we stopped paving, but yeah, I think there's an empty block in there that we stopped. Probably past Emerson.
I don't think
I
so
thought it
either.
was one.
I thought we cut 2 blocks.
Yeah, I'll double check. The other gravel street was down on Second from Valley to Rivers, that's gravel as it cuts through there at a weird angle. I don't know if that was an intention to, wanted to pave that one too or not.
Oh, yeah.
Valley to river.
I don't think we were.
It's got a pretty good jog in it right now, so it'd take a lot of work to straighten that road out. I don't know.
I don't either.
On Second Street? No, we were talking, we weren't.
I don't remember talking about that one. And maybe I wrote something down wrong too, I don't know.
You had Second,
Yeah, thanks.
yeah, we had Second Adams River and then Second River to Valley. So it was just on the 2 blocks were on there, but it was a weird gravel, so I wanted to double check, see if that one was gonna get paved or not. But doesn't sound like that was the intention of it. Okay, we keep going number 1 priority list. Jackson Street, from Benton to Francis. I did a 2-inch asphalt mode overlay on that one, just for the sake that that street is so wide. You burn through so much asphalt tonnage doing full depth, so there's some pretty bad spots, but we can capture those with some patching and do full depth patching of the bad spots, but, so that's why I have Jackson Street listed as a 2-inch, just to save some money. Cause even with just a 2-inch, we're still at $165,000, just cause the street's so wide through there. Webster Street, from Benton to Denison, right west of the school there. Same thing, so I have 6-inch, I have full depth replacement on that one. Spencer Street from College to Lorraine. That's the one right off the football field there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That one's in really rough shape. If you look at the cross section, there was no real crown to it. There's a lot of rutting kind of in the tire track, so I got some water stains. So I have full depth replacement for that to try and refix the subgrade and try and get some crown in it to get the road to drain.
That's what we were afraid of.
So that one's kind of pricey since for the length, so it's about $264. The last one, the next one, this is 3rd Street from College to Lorraine. Same thing with 4th, both 3rd and 4th. There's not many houses on there, but the roads are in pretty bad shape, so yeah. But just for the sake of the road, the conditions there, they really won't be full depth replacement. Next page, up on the northeast side of town, Ash and Birch. Just for the sake, again, the streets are wider and there's some of that cracking going on that 13 years, I've never seen sidewalk and curb and gutter poured like that before. So the bad thing is to try and fix it, you about to take the entire sidewalk out too, to pour regular curb and gutter section, put sidewalks. So I had enough, but then I was driving around today, I don't think I had enough sidewalk in there quantity wise, so just to offset the cost of the curb and gutter and sidewalk, I did a 2-inch, being optimistic that the road would hold up. When we did the corings, I think there's average 4 to 6 inches of asphalt up there. I think we poured that the first time we did the project. 2 years ago.
Isn't the curb and gutter then assessed back to the property owners,
Correct.
like we did before?
But we'd have to budget.
Huh?
We'd have to budget in case they ask the city to run the back.
Yes. I just wanted to clarify
Yeah,
that.
but yeah, that would be back to the,
Yeah, so there is 3.5 inches on ash and 4 inches on birch, so it's not thick to begin with, but it's not horrible condition, but again, as like I said, to try and offset the cost for half the material like curb gutter and sidewalk, I just wanna try and do it.
So you can't do it without doing the curb and gutters, is that what you're saying?
You can, but I'm just saying if you were trying to fix everything while you're doing it, you could just fix the street, leave the curb and gutter the way it is, but there's some sections that are pretty cracky. But now, yeah, you can fix the street and not touch the sidewalk or curb and gutter. The next one's Angle Road, the 2 next ones are from, each side of the bridge. Those were in the initial ones we did back in the report, I think. When did we do that? 2021, when we did the first PDR. We were going back with 8-inch thick concrete, just doing a truck route and then heavy truck loads going to elevators and concrete plants. So those 2 sections are listed as 8-inch concrete to go back. So I'll take the Quincy Street off that first one, so they're saving 90,000 there, so about 1.7 million, or even more, the way it's drawn. Like I said, you guys can shift, drop, bobble, pick what streets you can combine for a project. Way out of that. Go to priority number 2. Quincy Street, first to Spencer. It's in not horrible shape, so a 2-inch mill overlay would work great. This is 2 years. So we did Quincy Street, the previous one, that was all mill and overlay, and it worked out great. And they still look like they're in good condition today, so I think that's a good fit for Quincy. Francis Street, first to Spencer, that was 6-inch asphalt. All those streets down in that area, they were pretty wet underneath, I remember, a few years ago, so that's probably why they're falling apart there. So it'll be full depth. 2nd Street, Scott to Benton. Yep.
Huh?
2nd Street be full depth, and then Emerson Street, Quincy to Scott, again, kinda like Jackson, the street's really wide through there, try and keep the cost down, and it's not in horrible condition as far as alligator cracking, so I went with a 2-inch one over there at Emerson. The last one on number 2 is First Street from Angle to River. We had that one on the initial PER report also. I think the surprising thing when we recorded it the first time, so the first time we recorded it back in 2019, the one core came back as 1 inch thick of asphalt, and the other one's 1.5 inch thick asphalt, so there's not much asphalt on the street right now, which explains why it's in the condition that it is. So that one I have listed down as a full depth repair, so there'll be a lot of dirt to come out of that street to get 6 inches of asphalt.
And that's going all the way to River?
Yep, I think we had it from, the power plant, yep, all the way to.
Isn't there a couple blocks in there that are in pretty good shape, closer to, River?
They cored it down closer to the power plant, it was 1.5 inches thick.
Down there, but what about the other side?
They cored on each side, 1.5 inches and 1 inch on each side.
Oh, that's lower.
Yeah. So considering it's only 1 inch of asphalt, it's held up pretty good, so. So that was number 2. Priority number 3. Francis Francis Street from the access road to Second, we had full depth repair. And then Francis Street from Whittier north, down to North End, like we talked about before, but I do think there's another block that we missed, that we took off from that other project, so I will double check that tomorrow. Adams Street, Fourth to Third, that's a not horrible shape, so I think a 2-inch mill overlay would work well on Adams, on both those Adam blocks, from Fourth to Third and First to Spencer. Another, I guess I was gonna mention too, the one I just said on Adams, and then the one on Quincy, or right on the east and west side of the hospital too. And given the not horrible shape, I wanted to mill them both, also the fact that we get it out in the day and not have much disruption to the hospital too. That's also a good place, so. Next one's Benton Street, the access road up to Third Street, that'd be full depth repair. And then Second Street, Valley to River, that was the gravel one, I'll take that one. And then the next one, Second's from River to Adams. And then the last one on the third priority, the Whittier Street from College to Birch. And that's when Dan and I
One
talked.
with that intersection?
The intersection to the east.
Yeah.
I stopped short, but we can go through there. I seen how it kinda, when I drove today, I seen that street, the intersection's not in great shape, especially going north. But I talked to Danny earlier about, I think you guys had just done a armor coat on that street two years ago, a year ago,
Is that where we talking?
up here.
Intersection?
Remember Whittier?
I feel like you guys had armor coated that here recently, but.
Yeah, but JR was still here, cause
Because
that's,
it's
we ground it up and then laid it back down and then come
So
in.
it's probably
and
long
check
enough.
it.
It's probably been 5 years,
Yeah.
5 plus than 5.
So again, but again, it's not in horrible shape, so I think a 2-inch mill overlay would work great up there too. Any questions or concerns or sticker shock?
Yeah, sticker shock. If you were, what's your gut feeling on, from a community standpoint, where you should go?
That's always $1 million question.
That's what he never answers to anybody.
This is extremely helpful.
And I was telling Dan, around the Kearney area, I've been getting like $90 to $100 a ton for asphalt. But the last job we did with McCormick here, they're like at 138. And we asked McCormick why, and they said that's just what it costs them to do that. So right now, my estimate's $150 a ton. And given 2-3 years of inflation, oil's not getting any cheaper, so. But it is, the asphalt price is higher than I would see, but you are out here kind of away from everybody else, so. And then at that time, McCormick had a plant in Colby, so like they were trucking everything up from Colby. So I don't know if they still have a plant down there or not, but, which is not McCormick anymore, they
That
bought
is-
out.
isn't it
That
that
is
is-
fine, yeah. But otherwise, it's the same kind of bid items that we've done on the last few projects, so. I'll try to go back to the PER, and when JR was here, we went through and identified all the alley aprons, all the valley gutters through town, which I see you guys are fixing a couple now, that are in bad shape, so. Each one of these kind of picked out where the valley gutters are bad, or the alley aprons need to be replaced. And I just had a kind of a placeholder between 50 and 100 feet of curb per block, which is kind of what we ran into last time. So. No big trees, at least when I drive around, it's no big trees like the last time we had, so. Thoughts, questions? Need some time to dissect it?
Just out of curiosity, I'd like to go. That valley, it's all dirt,
But on which one?
the valley is all dirt.
Oh, yeah.
Anything on the other, what,
When I was driving around, I remember when JR was here, me and him drove around, and he was talking about some drainage issues. I don't know if there's still water, an issue that runs down there, but for some reason I thought me and him had looked at water running down that street. People were complaining, but other than trying to put some curb and gutter through there, or trying to do some, like a concrete flow liner or something, but
It washes pretty good, doesn't it? Down low.
At times, I think we got a tip now to where it's a little
was kinda disappointed that I drove by, where did we do that street? On Francis and Parkway, we did that alley apron, to try and keep that gravel up in the alley, but I think there's still a huge pile of gravel in the street that's must wash down to the street. Without paving that entire alley, I don't know how you would
Yeah,
try and stop that.
We had a lot of them in town.
I noticed that driving around, there's still, the alley's still washing pretty good down the street, but
Is Jackson besides Washington, is Jackson the widest street we have?
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much the same as Washington, Jackson.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any way to save a little by putting like a median in the middle of that?
I've looked at doing that for a couple of communities in Nebraska. They never followed through with it because in Nebraska, you get highway allocation based on your lane miles. So if you're taking away some of your lane miles, they lose some allocation money, so nobody's ever went to do it, but I have a few communities that also have 60-70 foot wide streets, and it kills their budgets trying to do the streets, but nobody's ever followed through with trying to narrow one, but it is a possibility to look at doing it before.
Would it make your job more difficult to do a mill and overlay
No,
if we did, or would we
no,
save
because you
any?
could do like a median, whether you do like a landscape median, just put something better in the middle, or
Yeah.
whatever you want to do with it, but yeah. I try and steer people away from narrowing it, because then you're dealing with bigger yards, redoing
Right.
driveways and sidewalks, and
Yeah,
that kinda gets messy sometimes.
but a landscape median, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
It's gonna take care of that.
I say that's the downside, and the
Rocks.
guys pushing snow don't
Green
like it either,
Fill
so.
with rocks and spray the shit out of
No.
it.
Yeah, landscaping and pushing snow around are usually the two negatives,
Yeah.
but. I was gonna look at your width.
Spencer's wide too.
I don't think it's any wider than,
I guess Spencer's definitely not as wide as Jackson.
Not as
No,
Jackson.
no, it's not as wide.
College is wide, college is 66. Up by the school and some, they must have found the parking. Yeah, Jackson's 63.
It's huge.
So yeah, you're basically paving 2 blocks at one time when you're going,
Mhm.
when you're going through there. First Street's pretty wide, First Street's 39 feet. So yeah.
Yeah, 20 feet wider than.
Okay, I'm gonna let you guys digest them, and like I say, you can mix match, move some costs around, but at least gives you an idea block per block of what a ballpark cost would be, so.
Yeah, this is huge. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you guys for having a meeting tonight, it worked out, good to come down, so.
Good.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you
alright,
very
well,
much.
just let me know if you need anything else.
Okay.
just real quick, the mobilization, all that kind of stuff, like, depending on how small or big. the
Yeah,
project
that's
is,
why I
part
kinda
of-
left those just as that, and I kinda left engineering kinda blank, 'cause it all depends on the scale of everything, so.
Yeah. But kind of that gives us an idea.
Yeah,
If we,
what did I do, yeah, I put 50,000, which that's typically what you get, and like I said, a small number for traffic control and seating, just to kind of have a placeholder, but. Yeah. If you're not doing a lot of curb and gutter or sidewalks, then your seating almost zero, but. Okay,
thank you so much.
alright, that's no problem.
Thank you.
Tyler, can I get that email
Oh,
that
yes. Do you need, I have extra copies if you need extra copies.
I do of number 2 and number
Yep.
3.
I got number 2 right here.
Thank you. Along with this conversation, I had handed these out, that kind of went along with this, so you could just see where you're at on your improvement funds right now. Sorry, Jen, I should have mentioned that before you handed me things.
Okay, no, I just was getting them ready. So we don't have to discuss it right now, I just.
Okay,
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
You gonna take that sign down?
Oh, yes, thank you.
I don't know what happened to Sherry. I saw her this morning, she said, see you tonight.
Trees tonight.
And we don't have to discuss it right now.
You might as well go. Yeah, we all got it. You all right with that, Lila? We just started to discuss the phones right now.
I'm sorry, what?
We discussed phones since
Yes,
Jen
of
got
course.
that passed out.
So if you look, on the very last page that's stapled to the Next Tech, proposal, this is an email, from Darren, he's a sales engineer at Next Tech. And he talks about a technology that's in the Vive quote. So for fax lines, for the water control system at the plant, and is your fire alarm to your phone line. Vive claims that they can plug into those phone lines, and then whatever the technology is, it'll convert those. But Vive does not offer that, so I called Darren and I asked him to explain why. I figured that there had to be a reason why it's not something that Next Tech will touch. And so I'm gonna give you guys just a little bit to read through what he typed, because this is very important before we can discuss these proposals.
I guess I didn't get a copy of that.
Come back to the next page.
Okay.
Oh, it's page one.
So basically, Next Tech would still use a regular landline for that.
No, Vive,
Vibe.
Next Tech won't touch it. And it's because it's not reliable for things, so Darren is explaining why they do not use that
Yeah, I
technology.
see that,
Mhm.
but, so what's our option with Next Tech?
Well, so, I'll get there in just a second.
Okay.
So, then if you look at Vive's proposal, some of Vive's, he included the internet cost, and we already pay internet, so you're gonna have to go to the page on the back to get the phone portion of the bill. Vive's insisting that that technology will work, it's included in this. So that's why I had Darren explain why Next Tech won't touch it. And as you read with what Darren said, when it comes to things like fire alarms and water systems, you want it to be reliable. So when Dan brought you guys those proposals, I don't know, 2 or 3 meetings ago, but we decided to wait to see if we could get apples to apples on these. Darren is the one that told Dan that in these cases, when you have things like a fire alarm or your water control system, that it's vital that it works, it's vital that the guys get a call when water level's low or there's an issue. Darren said the reason he told Dan is to reach out to those companies and see what they offer is because they're gonna know what is gonna work the absolute best. So, alls I can tell you guys, dollar-wise, Vive's gonna be the cheapest. I'm not sure we wanna trust the technology of plugging into the old phone ports and converting it like Darren talked about. My opinion is I won't be able to get an apples to apples quote we've been with Next Tech I've been here 19 and a little over a half years. We used Next Tech long before then. My understanding was is because and I think I've explained this, Next Tech uses AT&T phone lines, so we could have just as easy been paying AT&T all these years, but it's my understanding that years ago they went with Next Tech because it was a Kansas company, so more local. We're kind of in the same boat if you wanna look at it that way. Vibe started, Vibe bought Eagle, so when we got Eagle and got the fiber, it was a Hayes company, they've since sold out. The gal from Next Tech stopped in the office twice. Vive finally sent a technician out after I couldn't answer specific questions to get that quote on the phone system. They sent a technician out. But I think even if you go with Vive on the cheaper stuff, I don't think you wanna utilize the technology. They're talking about the,
So what does Next Tech use, or what do they do?
they told Dan to reach out to, fire alarm specialists to see what they offer. That's why, so now when you guys, and Dan may have to explain these, but you also have things from Atlas Automation. They've got Atlas has 2 pages stapled together. And then fire alarm specialist out of Waukegan. That's why he reached out to them to see what they, think is best.
It looks like they're doing the same thing. They're relying on internet and cellular technology.
Cellular.
Yes, that's no more reliable or less reliable than fiber from Vive.
These 2 things, they're plugging it into an old phone jack
Yeah.
and somehow converting it and
So they're
Yeah.
still connecting to the copper lines,
They're
the
still
old
connecting
AT&T
to
They're
the-
lines.
connecting to copper and then
Yeah.
going to cellular, so,
yeah,
or to internet, which is no different than what Vive's doing, except it's fiber.
yeah. So I don't,
Yeah.
my suggestion is to go with Next Tech. We've been with them for a long time.
Yeah.
That's only my suggestion. I think even if you decide to go to Vive, I would probably consider these other 2
Yeah,
options for the water system and the fire alarm.
yeah, the fire alarm specialist company.
And Atlas for the water system. And the Vive guy's been courteous. He's taken my phone call several times, but like I said, Neva's showed up in our office twice. So I'll leave it up to you guys, but here's the thing. Time's ticking, like I told you last time, I got delayed with everything that happened. But one of these days, Next Tech's gonna get the call from AT&T, and then Next Tech's gonna call us, and they're gonna hope that we have 30 days. Both companies are saying they need about 30 days to get the phone system ordered, get in here and get it put in, so we're kinda down to the wire on it. And really, as far as phones go, Next Tech, their phones are, and I haven't really looked at any of these phones, so I'm not saying one's better than the other. Next Tech quote is it has touchscreen capability. Vives, they only offer just like a regular phone. I don't know that one's any better than the other, can't say. I've only used one other, internet phone system, and I didn't have to use it much, so.
Either way you go, we're gonna have to go with,
That would be my suggestion. You can ask Dan his, but after having a verbal conversation with Darren Friday, I asked him to send that email out kind of explaining it in terms that we could all understand. And Darren made it very clear that, some companies do use that technology. It's just that Next Tech chooses not to because of the reliability, especially when it comes to things like water systems and fire alarms.
I know mine are plugged in, my phones go directly into the, modem. And mine are basically analog phones, the ones that I have. And they plug right into the modem and go straight to the internet.
And I tell you what, Bud, when I initially started this project, the only reason I found out that we were in this boat is because we were having some issues with the phones in the office one day. Technician told me about it, and I'm like, what? And so then it was kind of urgent that we needed to do something. I don't know enough about the technology, but I do think that at all of our locations, we want phones that are reliable and not, that are gonna work part of the time, not part of the time. I mean,
My cellular stuff up there, I have more trouble with it, and that's the darn, lottery machines down, because it loses cellular.
the only other thing I will say, I talked to the library director today, in Vibe's quote, fax machines are one that they can do all this conversion stuff too. Nextech, they don't use that, so, we would, if you guys go with Nextech, we have to still see if AT&T would service a fax machine at the library. But I talked to Terry today, and she just looked, she did an average for 2024 and averaged like, basically 4 faxes a month. And a lot of times, it's to places that don't have an email that they specifically wanna fax. And we talked about it a little bit, it's a service they offer, but we're also gonna have to weigh, if AT&T offers to take it, then it's $100 a month, are we gonna pay $100 a month? And I don't even know, and I'm not even gonna try to call AT&T at this point, because, you know what I'm saying,
You'll be on the phone for
You know,
another
Yeah.
they're not gonna maintain their lines at all, they're done with them, so.
Well-
When they quit, they quit,
And-
you're done.
and that's just it. And
But my fax machine works perfectly good, going, so.
fax machines would be one thing running through this technology. After talking to Darren, in my personal opinion, I wouldn't trust our water system with it, and I wouldn't trust the fire alarm with it. Because the water system, because I know firsthand, if that water system, if something happens and the dialer doesn't work, pretty soon he's getting phone calls that pressure's low and people aren't, and it can happen, but I'm just saying, I think we wanna make sure that we have a better option than maybe what's not quite as good for those 2 things, because those are vital.
Well, sometimes redundancy is what we need for that, right? A backup plan.
Yeah, do you know the hospital uses Nextech and the school uses Vi?
And so that's all I can really tell you. I was hoping to, not have to do this. I was hoping that this new phone system could be done long after I was gone, but because AT&T, even if they would service the fax at the library, who knows? It could be for 6 months, it could be for, nobody knows. And Nextech doesn't even know right now when they're gonna get the call. They've not got a set date on this, so, but once they get the call, we're hoping we have 30 days.
What's everybody's thought?
I like the fiber option, but it's just me. It's $200 cheaper a month.
And it's all fiber, it's
Yeah.
all fiber, it's all through our internet,
Yeah.
so,
Well, Nextech's been really good to you, and I guess I don't know enough about the technology side of things to be able to answer that question.
Justin, Dara, you guys have a preference?
Like I said, I've used them both. Don't have any problems and a lot of benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what we've seen at the bank. But yeah, we got rid of AT&T, cause it was, and the fees went up, and we had to wait and put in a service call, and who do you guys have at the bank?
I think they switched to Nextech. They just brought all new phones out and hooked us up that way.
Multi-line?
Mhm. Yep. All banks.
Motion to go one way or the other?
Move to go to Nextech.
Moved by Justin,
Second.
second by Larry, all in favor?
That's fine.
what do we got?
You good with next step? Good with
I'm,
next step?
I'm fine.
Yeah, yes, okay. Thank you, thanks for being patient on the project.
Probably should figure this out.
Yeah, Dan will have to reach out, I mean, so we probably also need a motion on the other two things, and I don't necessarily know that we would need a motion tonight on that, because that way maybe he can, because Atlas has a couple of things, maybe he can decide what he wants, and I think by the next meeting on those,
Well, the way Atlas is set up, this higher, is one that's gonna cost $131.40 a year. It's gonna give you a warning no matter what, so even if it goes out, power goes out, it's gonna get a warning. The cheap one's not gonna give you the warning if the internet goes out or the power goes out.
Cheap one, which one's the cheapest?
The 1,942. And then it don't have a yearly subscription to it either, but the front one, or the first one does, which is the one that will make sure you get the call supposedly. And then the fire alarm one is just simply regular. That's all I really know about it.
So you don't need a motion on those? Do you have a preference? I mean, I think you could probably make a motion on the, fire alarm specialist, because it sounds like that's what they offer, right? So I think it would just depend on what you guys would be comfortable with, or what Dan's suggestion is on the Atlas, what may be better.
I think you wanna get the calls either way, whether we're out of power or internet or not, if something shuts down on the water, you probably need to know. Just gonna get a higher
Is
price.
everybody okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a motion for the fire alarm specialist?
Second.
McHale, second by Justin, all in favor? And then the Atlas automation. Moved by Kale, second by Bear, all in favor?
Is that, I'm sorry, which option was that for?
For the first one.
The higher price.
The higher
Higher
price
price.
one.
All right, budget. Lila, you want to take a breath? I feel like you should stand up, show your
I
shirt.
should show you my
I know,
shirt.
yeah.
Microsoft
I
shirt.
wanted to see,
I'm like, yes,
My husband,
that's cute.
husband got that for me,
yes.
Yes.
cause this is packed full of spreadsheets in here. I wanna, I'll wait for Kale to get back. Oh, okay. I just wanted to point out that that was handed out for you guys to look at for the streets, when you guys are looking at anything you take home. That's just the current balances of your project fund, which was your bonds, which obviously have to be used for streets. And then your infrastructure improvement fund, that's the 1% sales tax. It's, as it was voted on, it can be used for any infrastructure improvements, but the intent was for that to go to streets. And then your capital improvement fund is funded by transfers from all the other utility funds, and that one's for capital improvements, which can include streets. You've been using it though for electric, that's kind of the priority with the capital improvement fund. Also, other things for capital improvement, Dan put together, and we'll get to it a little bit later, but he did put together a 5-year plan for the capital improvement fund. Just kind of some guidelines of where that might go. And we'll talk about that when we get more into the budget. But this was specifically just so you had an idea of where you're at with funding right now. And then the, of course, the special highway fund, it doesn't get a lot of money. In the past, we've used that for, like the intersection work that's getting done. So that also has to go towards road improvements of some kind. So that's what those two forms are all about.
And how much do we have left over from the, is that the second project? What did we talk about?
The bonds,
That we needed to do
the ordinance,
and
Yes.
we're waiting to spend it all.
that's that 188,410.95. Yep,
That's the one that we'd have to get Gilmore and Mel to do an ordinance and
exactly,
pay
yeah.
some expense that we wanted to spend that all at once.
And my only question on that was where well, that's just bonds, so you can use it on these streets, yeah. so, that, yeah. Okay, well, we'll try to get through this relatively fast, but please ask any questions that you have as we're going through. So what we're gonna be looking at here is the actual budget workbook. The way the process works is the auditors, they get the most recent budget workbook from Municipal Services. They populate the first column that you will see when we're looking through this. The actual amounts for 2024 are from the audit, so those cannot be changed. We approved the audit, those numbers are from that. So that's set, can't change those. The middle column that we're looking at, when the auditors send it back to me, they populate that with the numbers from our 2025 budget. Some of those are okay, some not so great, because things change from the time you do your budget to right now. So when we're going through this, what we're looking at in the 2025 column is an estimate based on a lot of different factors, and I'll show you that as we move along, but again, some of them are the 2025 budget numbers and some of them are changed, and I'll show you that. The last one is the proposed budget for 2026. These are numbers that I've come up with, just starting points for you guys to look at. An awful lot of them are the same as the 2025 budget. Some of them are different for reasons, and I will show you that. Anything can be changed except for that 2024 column. Up or down, whatever you guys decide tonight, anything it can be changed. So we'll start with the very first page is basically just the certificate page. This is what this current budget looks like with the budget authority for all of your funds and the amount of ad valorem tax. That 368,905 is a little less than 3%. Amanda said that we'd probably want to stick to 3% increase in ad valorem. So that's what I attempted to do with this first budget. So that's just a little bit less than 3%. The library is getting their 4.5 mils. Okay. All right, the next page is just the allocation of taxes that we get from the state. These are numbers that the state sends to us with their estimates. So again, those are things we're not going to change because that's the estimates from the state. And those will flow through two other areas in the budget, and I'll show you that. The schedule of transfers, again, these are populated on this page from numbers that are further on in the workbook based on what we put in there. Right now, based on the current way that the numbers are in here, with this, we're going to be moving 315,000 into capital improvement, 100,000 into equipment reserve, and 300,000 into the general. The one that's the most important is the general fund because the other ones are, well, they're important, but the general fund is the one that's supported by taxes and transfers, and a little bit of other stuff. Okay. These next two pages, just real quick, it's just our statement of indebtedness, shows our bonds, and then the pool, which is also the bonds, but we actually lease the pool from the PBC, so that's why it's a little bit separate, because it's a lease agreement. The other ones are just strictly bonds. Just shows you where we're at with our bonds and what the outstanding payments are. This is just required in the budget. You have to provide this information to show our debt. Any questions on any of that? Okay, we're gonna get into the meat here in just a second. The next one is a page that is in the budget to basically determine whether or not the library is gonna qualify for state grant funds. The auditors make sure when they're working with the library part of this that they do qualify for the grant, and they do. One of the biggest things is if you levy more taxes than you did the year before, you're going to qualify for the grant. And since we only levied 4 mills last year, that was no problem getting this. But you can see on that page that the proposed year 2026 is 4.5 mills for the library. Okay. So we're gonna, the most complicated fund we have is the general fund. Lots and lots of things in the general fund. The way that I've laid this out is you're gonna see on the left-hand side here, the general fund revenue. And on the right-hand side, this is the spreadsheets that I think I talked about before. What I do when I'm looking at the budget is I go back 5 years, actually it's 4 years, and look at the actual numbers for every single line item that we have. Every account, I look at all of that. And I compare, when I'm coming up with the number that we're gonna use for our 2026 budget, I kind of look at history. What did things look like? What's been a trend? Don't want to overestimate on revenue, and you don't want to underestimate on your expenses. So we just kind of try to find a balance. A good example of that would be some of these that hardly ever change, like the RV park license. That's pretty consistent. So that's what I went with was $80. I don't want to go through this line by line, but this top part is all of the taxes that we get from the state or the county. The motor vehicle tax, RV tax, all that kind of stuff is up there, and those are the numbers that were given to us from the state. So the right-hand side, I'm just going to point this out. If you go down line by line, the ones that are highlighted in gray should match over on the left-hand side. For example, the delinquent tax is $5,000, and if you look over on the left, that's what it is on the actual budget page. So on the budget page, those numbers, I'm showing you over here in the spreadsheet, what all goes into that particular number. Does that make sense? Okay. Because some of the things are good. Well, licenses, fees, and permits. That's a really good example. The total is $5,990. Can hardly read that, but it's made up of all these things actually go into it. You don't really have to be too concerned about each individual line item so much. You just want what you're really looking at is the total and making sure that looks appropriate year over year. I have highlighted down there the camping fees, and the reason I had that highlighted, I just wanted to point out, this sheet that's in the front of your thing that's for the roadside park, I just wanted to bring this to your attention and kind of get it on your radar. When we first started collecting camping fees, the general idea was to make improvements to the park up there with the camping fees that we bring in. And we really haven't done anything up there. You don't have to budget now, but I want it to be on your radar possibly for future years. You can see that we've brought in $21,241 in camping fees since 2018. We spent a little bit on some improvements, but we've got, based on that, around $17,000 that could go into that park. Just something to keep in mind if you want to, maybe try to get a grant to improve the bathrooms or something like that. It would make good matching funds. Just want it on your radar. I don't have any of that in the budget this year at all, but just to make you aware was the point of that. Because I don't know that the new guys especially knew that was kind of the intent of those funds. So any questions on that? So that's why that's highlighted. Next page, I kind of did it this way so you can flip back and forth and look at the actual budget workbook page. The only things I needed to bring to your attention on this was some changes, a little bit of changes. In the 2025 budget, we had $11,000 in revenue, expected revenue for health insurance reimbursement. That's not happening because that was me, and I'm on Medicare now, so it's zero now for 2026. No. I'm not making that change. So that's why that's zero. And then the recycling, rebate, tonnage, and employee, those were reimbursements we got from the county. We used to get them every year, and this is the last that we're going to get these payments from the county. And these were, I think, I wasn't here when this happened, but I think it was leftovers from when all of that got shut down over in Colby and the county finally dispersed our share. So that's what that is. That's gonna be zero from here on out. We're not gonna get that anymore. When we get to the expenses, I'll show you what we've done with that revenue. You have two options with it. You can, if you want to, amend the budget for 2025, and then all of that is like available to spend. Or you can just, we've spent some on the forklift, and you can carry over the rest to next year. I talked to Dan. He didn't really have any specific plans for this year, any more equipment for recycling. So for now, I have carried it over, and it's in the 2026 budget to spend. And then you don't have to worry about amending the budget this year, if that's what you want to do. So that's what that revenue is. And then the last page on the revenue is just miscellaneous things. I didn't really make any changes there, kind of just estimated based on what we've gotten in the past on things. And you can see the total revenue, not counting ad valorem tax, is $918,276. And so that over here matches what we have over here. Any questions on revenue? You guys can take these home and study.
Memorize it.
Yes, there'll be a test.
Will be a test.
Is
So-
it multiple choice?
Yeah and no. Maybe. So the next thing we're gonna go over is the general fund expenditures. And like I said, this general fund is the one that's gonna take the most time. But I really want everybody to kinda know where it's coming from. So in the general fund, we have general government, we have streets, we have parks and rec, the pool, recycling, law enforcement, fire department, municipal court, and the theater. All those departments are part of the general fund. So each one of them is on this detail page is broken down into sections, and on the actual spreadsheet pages you can see everything that makes up all of those categories for all of those departments. What I would suggest is take a look over on the budget page and see how the numbers look, and let me know if you have any questions about, why is this one 5,000 more than it was estimated for this year, that kind of thing. Sometimes that's gonna be salaries. A lot of times it's gonna be salaries. Increases, we budgeted 10% increases like you guys have been doing in the past. That's what I did here. Not to say you're gonna give 10, but you've got the budget authority to do so. If you want me to make that less or more, I can do that. But right now, that's what I used, was that 10% guideline when I calculated out potential salaries. Down in the roadside park, I wanted to point out we had some unbudgeted expenses for the tree removal. And the only reason that's important, you've got plenty of budget authority in your general fund. You're gonna be fine, in my opinion, even with those additional expenses. But my question on that was, I actually had a citizen ask me if there was a budget for tree replacement, to replant trees that are dying and being removed, if that's something the council has considered. And we really don't have a budget for trees, but if that's something you wanted to consider, it could be put into the Parks Department. And you don't have to do that this year, but something again to keep in mind, that it makes sense if you're gonna remove trees, especially, that we replace them. What was that? So if you think about that, if that's something that you want me to increase, what I've got in the budget line for that, for those two parks, that would be something to decide tonight. So I'm just gonna make a note there that I wanna come back to that. But you don't have to, but that would be a good place to fund it from. Keller Pond, in years past, the current budget for 2025, and it has been for the last couple of years, has been $1,000. But it used to be 5,000, and the reason for that is we are contractually obligated to maintain Keller Pond. And even though we haven't necessarily spent that in the years past, we have, back when 2022, 2021, planted trees, done that kind of thing out there. And that's what that 5,000 was budgeted for, was to allow us to be able to do those types of things that are needed at Keller Pond. With a budget of $1,000, that doesn't give you a lot of room. So I bumped it back up to 5, where it had previously been. Is that okay? Do we want to leave it at that? What's your thoughts?
I think we better, we're obligated to maintain, if something would come up and we don't have it budgeted,
Yeah,
I'd rather have the funds available and not need them than need them and not have it budgeted.
that's the thought. The contract doesn't actually spell out a dollar amount. It just says that we're responsible for maintenance and upkeep of Keller Pond. So, okay, I'm gonna leave that at 5. Then,
Didn't that, just to backtrack,
Yes.
cause we used to pay for the mowing,
that was a different line item.
okay,
There used to be a line item, and I don't have it in, well, I probably do in here somewhere, mowing services. And that was budgeted separately,
okay,
because that was a,
I
that was a,
just know that we did and now
yes,
we
but
don't.
it did not come out of the Keller
Okay.
Pond budget. It
Okay.
came out of mowing. Because a lot of that we got reimbursed for from the Keller family.
okay,
So it was a separate line item.
okay.
Yeah. I'll just, now that you mention that, now I'm looking to see where's it at. It might be off of there because we're not doing it anymore.
Mowing services up underneath our contractual, middle of the page.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Yeah, so you can see what we budgeted, or what we actually spent, actually. Now, with that said, we spent that, but we also got reimbursed.
Mhm.
So you'll see an offset of that, in the revenue in those particular years. But we haven't done that in the last, couple of years. Triangle Park, we had, $500 was in the 2025 budget. Is that something you still want in there, or? I don't,
I would think so. I might as well.
what's it for? I mean, is it something that we necessarily do, or is it just to have money in case they ask, or what's the intent?
Just need something painted.
Well, I'm just curious. I put it in there.
Yeah. Scott comes and sees us.
I think it's probably good to track to see what we spend on the triangle.
Yeah, definitely.
Just my opinion, because it is on city property. The initial statement by Triangle Park, was it wasn't gonna cost payers money, and it has a little bit, but those are our facilities, so, I think it just needs to be made clear for the public that it's expenses incurred because we own the property, not that we're budgeting for Triangle Park. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes, it
Yeah.
does.
It's more for expenses incurred because it's on our property that we may have to come up with, like the signs or paint. I would probably leave that in there. for
Sprinklers
public.
and stuff like that.
I would leave that in there.
Does
for
it need to
public
be more?
transparency.
Dan, do you think it needs to be more than that, or is that a sufficient amount? I didn't know. I just used what what y'all did last year.
Tell them.
I think you'd be enough, don't you?
I mean, if you look at what you spent, previous year was quite a bit, but I think that was,
That was the paint.
and so far,
The signs, right?
it's 151.44, can't even read that, for 2025. That's what's been spent so far this year.
When does the project actually supposed to be completed?
There's still another couple stages.
They're another stage, yeah. Phase
Which one
3
was?
for the,
Sidewalk?
sidewalk.
Walking track.
I think we have to pay
And
for
they-
water.
Narrowed it down too, they're not
What's
getting
that?
We
clear.
have to pay for anything like the water.
Mm.
But the,
That's, they were gonna ask them to come in on the whole thing.
for the street light.
So what dollar amount do you want there?
$1,000.
Okay. I'll make a note there. Is that good with everybody? Okay.
And we, just on the parks with the tree stuff,
Yes.
I know Dan and I talked a little bit with Matt about doing, like when he did the line clearing of trying to get, maybe not yearly, but maybe trying to get him on a rotation to where now that we got the bulk of the issue that just doing a maintenance cycle, if that's something tree that we could budget.
That would be right here in these two line items, so you would just need to increase those, whatever you think.
So how many trees got taken out for?
One over here, I don't know how many out of the roadside.
So we need to plant those?
But I'm just wondering if that could, you know, with the tree trimming and then if we want to add
What
in-
about the ones on Main Street? Justin said, I mean,
Yeah, there was,
So
how many on Main Street, 3, 4?
like more than
More
6.
than that,
I think it's 6.
6. And I don't know what it costs to get trees.
$500 at least, tree. For at least 2 years old. Depends on tree. How big the tree is.
You just have to give me an amount that you want in the budget, and I'll make that adjustment.
Dan, what do you think on the line clearing? I mean, do you have any thought as far as,
No, in
cause
fact,
you got
that's-
most of it done, but then we kind of just talked about getting on
How much was the total bill from the last time?
on which part? The
Wasn't it
tree
a couple
trimming?
thousand a day or something?
3,000 a day?
3,000 a day?
yeah,
We have a
Try
budget,
to-
15, 20,
I mean, a budget that much annual,
I think it was over
So
20.
you would need that
Probably
much money.
maybe every other year, maybe do half.
That's probably something we should add in the capital outlay, because I think we're on capital.
You can't use capital outlay for, removing and replacing diseased or dead trees, you can't use capital improvement for.
But as far as the line clearing and tree trimming?
Not capital improvement, no. That's I looked that up today because we had this conversation.
Or maintenance?
It's a maintenance, it's considered a maintenance expense, so that's not a capital improvement. Yeah. Now, if you plant like a row of trees or something that increases your property value, it could potentially be considered capital improvement. But just replacing a tree that has died would
So
not
we
be.
replaced all the trees on Main Street, that could be capital improvement.
It could be,
Mhm.
potentially.
Yeah.
But you don't have to budget that, cause that's capital improvement, so you would have to talk about that, but not tonight, we don't need to know that. But I do need to know what you wanna budget in these line items
I was just
here.
trying to figure out what we took out this year.
I don't remember what we took
Taken
it
out
out
of electric,
For what,
the line
The
clearing.
line clearing. I'm just thinking if we're gonna try
who
to-
did we pay for that?
Matt Hensley.
The first batch we paid out of electric,
Because
because
that's
that
the
was
line
Cause
clearing.
it was all
specific
line clearing, yeah.
line clearing.
The
Then the second
second
batch we paid out of the parks, because
'Cause it
we
was
didn't
the
have any
parks.
other option, because it wasn't.
So that was this amount.
Yes,
Here.
the 7,000 that you see there.
I was just thinking if we're gonna kinda get him on rotation of clearing lines and or trimming trees.
Wanna
maybe
increase that
those
to-
amounts are gonna come.
So for the line clearing, we probably need to have the money in electric.
Right. So just for the parks, if we bumped those both to 4 or 5,
For
For-
And that-
taking out and putting back? Or is-
Yeah. I think
this
that
is
would
just
be-
anything that happens with,
Yeah, 5,000.
this is anything that happens in the roadside park, trees or whatever.
Or
It-
5 and 5.
5 and 5. Now, I'll just remind you that the way that we do this when we're increasing things is we will just increase a transfer from a utility fund into the general fund so that we keep our taxes at 3, just to let you know. So it'll probably come out of, I would imagine, the utility fund, but it'll come out of one of those funds. When
you're
this
talking
is all
five?
said and done, we'll figure it out.
5 and 5.
Okay. So 5 and 5 on those. and then 1,000 on tap. Anything else here that looks, I mean, everything else is pretty consistent. Next page, I'm just gonna point out, we had $20,000 budgeted for equipment purchases in streets, but Dan didn't know what that was. And there has been nothing spent in that line item, at least back to 2021. So I left it at 0, because I don't know what that is, and in my opinion, equipment purchase should be out of equipment reserve, so I just left that at 0.
Unless there was something we would've,
You can do it for a street sweeper or something.
But that would be equipment reserve.
unless
So-
we budgeted it knowing something was,
Well, that's what I
Isn't
wondered,
there
but
a truck
I get thinking if we're out of the way.
or something we were talking
was there
about?
something we would've approved that we carried over? That would, I don't know. Huh, okay, I'm good, yeah.
so I just left it at 0.
Okay, I'm good with that.
In recycling, this is where the forklift comes in. Under the current column for 2025, 18,750, that's the forklift, and we used a portion of those funds that you got for that. Over on the 2026 budget, that's, and you got to take into consideration a little bit of rounding, but that's the remainder that's left, 22,350 approximately. I moved it over into 2026 because Dan said we likely aren't going to be spending it this year. So I moved it over into 2026. Now you can spend it next year for something. But it's budgeted in recycling because that's what it came into.
But just to make sure that I understand, just cause it's, if he does have something come up this year and it's still something, it'll still be come out of this year's budget, and you can
Yes.
still leave this budgeted for 2026 in case something comes up. Even,
Yes.
even though she said it's a carryover for the funds in, if you leave this in here, it's still in our budget for general fund. And so that way if we would have anything come up, and something to consider with recycling, now that we aren't getting any rebates back or anything, it's strictly ours. That's probably not really a bad idea, but worst case scenario, if he has something come up this year,
It is in the revenue.
it is in the revenue, and so as long as we have the budget authority in the general fund.
Yes.
And that's the kicker with some of the stuff she's been saying tonight, like that $11,000, that was budgeted revenue that we're not getting for 2025. So
Right.
we're,
But you did get this.
but we did get this, not really a trade-off considering, but I just wanted to make that clear that they all understood that money is still available this year if they have something happen, as long as our general fund is within the budget authority and we have the cash.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. Yes. So, yes. Okay, next page. The only thing over here is municipal court. Municipal court used to be just part of the clerk's job. Now that we've got a municipal court clerk, we need to pay his salary, a little bit of his salary out of municipal court. I'm estimating 6 hours a week. That may be a little high, but it's really hard to tell. We might get really busy. But I budgeted for that amount to come out of municipal court, and the rest of his salary comes out of utility where it currently is. So that's what that is. I've just made that adjustment so we can pay him. Now you'll notice that we don't have anything budgeted this year for that, but it's okay. We didn't start doing this until just recently because he just got appointed. We're only looking at a half a year of salary. It's not a big significant amount of money. So that's not going to affect your budget authority significantly. It's not going to make a dent in that, but that's what that's all about for Wyatt. Okay, the last page that I have a question on, these are the employee benefits page. This is all just based on, pretty much set in stone, based on what the salaries were, and I already explained that. But the health and life insurance, I wanted to make sure you still wanted to keep it at $275 for the budget. I think that's sufficient. You can see based on last year, the 2024 actual was 177,467. So you're below that. If you happen to get two more employees and they had families, you would be getting close to that 275, depending on what health insurance does. But I think it's always a good idea to budget high on that and then not need it than the other way around. So I left it at 275. Okay. The last page is the very last expenses for the general fund. So all of that stuff that we just talked about here on the left-hand side, the totals are up at the top. You've got all your different departments and the totals for each department. And the subtotal for all of those other things we just talked about. Then we've got these individual line items down below that I do need your input on. The very first one is the property cleanup. We've been budgeting, I think, 20,000. Often we don't spend anything, but the intent of that is to have it available in case you do property cleanup, and I think that's been in your discussions recently.
I think that's been, was that when Mike was here, we started budgeting 20,000 for if we would have to go through a condemnation proceeding? That
Yep.
we started budgeting that so we could have those funds available if we had to go that route, so I would say leave it at
Is that a
27.
sufficient amount?
I think so, I guess we can verify with Lauren if she, I don't know what it would cost to go through a legal proceeding if we had to go through.
Well,
Do we even have anything on the radar for this? Are we approaching that level?
we kind of got to make a decision on the amount tonight, otherwise we're going to have another budget workshop.
But
meeting.
I mean, I know, I'm sure that's I'm just saying, it'd be nice to know kind of an idea of
What it
5,000
would
property, you know what I'm
cost.
saying? That kind
Yeah.
of has a ballpark so we know going forward.
But we don't have that.
We don't have that, so I would leave it, but I'm like, it would be nice to just kind of, we've never went through a full legal proceeding to do that, to know what it would cost if we were going through condemnation proceedings.
Yeah.
It might be coming up, I don't know.
Do you want to leave it 20, bump it to 25? Leave it.
What if they wanna find out from Lauren, and then, at the next council meeting, if we need to discuss the budget, incorporate a budget
No, we
workshop?
have to have, unless you want to have another budget workshop, tonight you need to decide on the numbers.
Just leave it.
So that at the next council meeting, we've got a budget that can
I'd
be
say leave it at
approved
20.
and we can move forward. So,
I'd leave it at 20, like I said, I'd just be curious to know
Yeah.
what kind of that ballpark figure.
that'd be a
if
good
we'd have to
conversation.
go through,
And especially for when you're doing next year's budget, then you have a better idea
Mhm,
too.
yeah.
So, all right,
I
I'm
would
leave
leave
it
it,
20.
but we can have that conversation with Lauren just to kind of maybe get a ballpark.
When-
And it's
when
gonna be
Lana
case by
comes
case
back and does
different.
next year's budget.
I know,
so-
that's what I'm saying, yep,
Mhm.
she's got the shirt for it, so.
I do. I do have that. Next one, so there's some sheets in here. All of these individual things, the organizations that have requested funding. The first one on our list is the Cheyenne County Development Corporation. They requested a 20% increase. The county went with an 8% increase. That's what I kind of used, conversations with, as a starting point. You guys can do anything you want, but the number that you see here is also an 8% increase, from last year. You can kind of see back to 2021, what it was back then. It's, increased significantly since then. I think the one year was 16%, I'm not sure what they were, the increases year over year, but anyway, that's what an 8% increase would be. They're asking for 20.
What's everybody's thoughts?
Seems high.
20's a lot,
Yeah.
What's a lot?
20% increase.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Everybody good with 8?
What's the justification, I guess, for 8%?
You said their budget's.
That's shocking.
And I don't know that. Let's see,
They're on there. Oh, have they approved anything
Have
yet?
they
I don't know.
donated any money to them? They
Well,
used to
yeah.
not.
Well, I don't know, that's proposed, so they
See,
must
they have
have.
not received in 2025 budget receipts, they have not received any money, the second box down.
Oh, yeah.
See, I don't think Red City,
That's a pretty hefty increase.
yeah.
You can do more, you can do less, you can do 8. I just need to know.
I'm all right with the eight.
And that's, the 8 is the 40,
Yes,
Yeah.
42,000 is an 8%,
yeah, I'd like that then.
okay. Next thing down to just talk about briefly is the miscellaneous expense for the library of 7,000 for the current year. That is the $500,000, that's accounting for the $500,000 of tax that didn't get levied, that I believe you guys decided that you would give them at the end of the year if funds are available. So I've put that in an estimate for 2025, so that's what that is. But obviously you don't see that carried over because that should be just a one-time thing. The next one to decide on is the senior center donation. It was $10,000 this year. 2024 was 8, 2025 was 10, and I just carried over the 10, but you can change that to whatever you want.
You know what the county did there?
I don't know.
I can't remember.
And their budget thing is in here too, or their statement of activity.
So that other income includes our 10
I'm sorry, what?
in their statement?
Oh, I don't know. I'm gonna guess.
So 7,200 somewhere else.
Let me see what you're looking at.
That sounds about right, I didn't feel like the county was.
Yeah.
And they come out negative.
But I thought they had a pretty decent.
I mean, they ask for a lot of donation, or grants and stuff for some of the projects they're doing, but just to keep the doors open.
Under the 10, Hale School was 10. They didn't ask for more, did they? They just,
No, I think they're very happy with anything you guys are willing to provide.
is everybody okay with 10?
Okay. All right, the next one is community services. We've changed this a little bit. So when this particular, providing funding for these community services started, we only had the child services and domestic violence, and so we created a line item for them. And now we have the food pantry as well. If you keep adding additionals, it doesn't make sense to continue to add a separate line item for every entity that's receiving funding. Moving forward, we're going to we changed the name. It was the food pantry. We've changed it to the community services allocations. We're just going to use that one line item for all of them, yes, because it makes it a lot easier. You're budgeting one line item and it's for all of them that you're going to fund. Now, you'll need to decide on the individual amounts that you're going to do, for the ones that have asked right now, and then come up with whatever your total's gonna be. So, option,
Where will that show at, so we'll know next time?
on your budget page, let me show you real quick here. This is the easiest way to show you, right here. Here's the budget page. Community service allocations, right here.
Yeah, but that won't break out each one like the food
No.
pantry versus the,
Not here, it won't break it out, but in our software it will. We will see it in reports in our software. And so if anybody ever wants to see that, it's just a generated report. but it makes the accounting a whole lot easier if we just use one line item for it. So options requested an increase to 2750 from 2500, which is a 10% increase. The food pantry, I don't know that they actually requested a specific amount when they were here, but we gave them you gave them $2,500 this year. The other one was Western Kansas Child Advocacy Center. You gave all three of those $2,500, and then that left $2,500 for whatever you want to do, whoever comes and asks, or at the end of the year, that's what's left. So you just need to decide on the amounts that you're going to budget for each of those. That, if you want to give each of those a specific amount, I need to know what that is. And I also need to know what the total is for that line item. Does that make sense?
Stay the same, would you?
Well, if we're giving them 250 more, I mean, or if that's what they're asking for, the options, we
Yeah.
give each of them 250 more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you raise it to
We're just thinking
11,000, yeah, if you raise it to 11,000, you could give the three that have previously been funded 2,750, and then that leaves you 2,750 for.
Except they're asking for 2750.
Maybe else is.
Like Kale, if you leave it,
Always give them
even three
2,500
across the
before. What was the
if you
child?
left it at 10, then you.
2,500.
Okay, so it's
You
everyone's
know what I mean? So you
250.
not increasing the budget.
I'm good with the 25.
Yeah, if you don't increase the budget, then I think you'll have 1,750 left, or what's something.
Yeah, well, Gail mentioned an even three, and I'm like, even if you increased it to 3 across and only had 1,000 left over, you're not increasing the budget more than 10. Cause we didn't use it last year, right?
It's whatever you wanna do.
It's like those services are needed more than anything else around here.
So 3 for each.
Three.
I like three.
Three for each with 1,000 inclusion?
Okay.
Leave it as it is.
Okay. Okay, that is, wow, we got through the general fund. I'm gonna zip right through the rest of this. Okay. The next pages are the bond and interest. We're gonna talk about, well, let's talk about the library first at the bottom. I really don't have much to do with putting the library numbers together because they're super, super simple. They're just all the taxes that we get in for, and those are determined by the state. And then we levy the 4.5 mills, which are calculated in. They take out they add the delinquent comp rate. That just, the goal here is to get the library 4.5 mills, and that's what we've done. So, and then everything that comes in goes out to the library. Not a lot to really budget on that other than that, so, does that make sense? Okay. Up above, we've got the bond and interest fund on the left and the infrastructure sales tax on the right. The infrastructure sales tax is that 1% sales tax. The only thing that happens here is sales tax comes in. We have to make sure we transfer enough out to make the bond and interest payments the next year. And the rest of it, as near as we can get, gets transferred to the infrastructure improvement fund. You'll notice that we had some unencumbered cash. That was basically just because of budgeting. You just don't know how much money you're gonna get. So you try to guess as best as you can. Sometimes you'll end up with too much money in there, and then the following year, you will then budget to give that or put it over into the fund that you can. It carries over and then gets transferred out in the next year. So the unencumbered, so to try to make that clearer, because our incoming unencumbered cash for 2025 was more than anticipated, we're gonna end up with 39,903 of unencumbered cash. We can't spend that because we'd go over our budget authority that was determined in that budget. So we're gonna carry that forward as unencumbered cash for 2026. But we're gonna bring it down to zero. We're gonna try to spend as much as we can that we get in. So we budget a little high. We're anticipating sales tax at 270. May not get that high, but that's what we're budgeting. And that's what we're saying we're going to get. And the goal is to give us enough budget authority that we can transfer out all of the sales tax that we get. So does that make sense? We don't want to go too high, but that's pretty close, because in 2024 we actually got 269,000, but if you look at previous years it wasn't quite that much. So I kept it at 270 because I thought last year was maybe just an unusual year, so we kept it at 270. But if you look at it, you can see, compared to the bond and interest fund, you can see that the amount that's budgeted as a transfer out, for example, in 2025, that's the amount that's shown as unencumbered cash at the beginning of 2026, 91,833 in the transfer out for 2025 becomes the unencumbered cash in the bond and interest for 2026, and that's that's the amount of the payment down below for the principal and interest. So does that make sense? Okay. We've just got to make sure that we're transferring out enough to pay the next year's bonds. And that's the priority out of that, and the remainder tries to go into that infrastructure improvement fund for streets. Okay. The next one, special highway, that's tax money from the state. That's an estimate that we got from the state. This money can only be used for streets, roads, that kind of stuff. That 62,220 that's in the estimate for 2025 is the intersections that are being done right now. Dan didn't think there would be any more this year. Your budget authority is pretty high, 188, so if there is more, you can do it. But the reason that we didn't increase that is because, let's say we increased that by 30,000, but then we didn't do it, well, then that didn't carry over to 2026, and that lowers your budget authority for 2026. So we're just saying that what's been done right now is it, even though you can do more. That makes it so that your budget authority for next year is higher, if you need it. Does that make sense? It's kind of it's a budget thing. Does that make sense though? Okay. So you can still spend it. You've got quite a bit more that you can spend this year if you need to with the budget authority. So, okay. Special parks. This one, we're not going to probably see a lot of activity in it. That comes from the alcohol tax. This year so far, we have only gotten $30 from the state for alcohol tax because we don't have anybody selling alcohol anymore. There aren't any restaurants selling alcohol, so that's probably not going to have much activity in it moving forward. What it's used for, by statute, that money has to be split half between the general fund and half between the special parks fund. And the only thing we use the special parks fund is for the scout hut, paying utilities, paying upkeep. So the money that's there we use. If it's not there, then we pay those bills out of the general fund. So there's not a lot of activity in that particular fund, but that is one that's governed by state statute because it's a state tax. That make sense? Okay. Electric and water utility. Not a lot of change year over year on this, you will notice. And if you want to take a closer look at all of the years of past, you'll see that there's not a lot of change in most of this, the revenue. It's pretty consistent. So you're not going to see a lot of change in this fund, in the revenue. In the expenses, the biggest change is going to be in the personal services. We're budgeting for a lineman. We're hopeful that maybe we can get a lineman. And so that's an expensive employee. And so that increase that you see is budgeted so that we can hire one if we find one to hire. So that's what that is. any questions or concerns about that. That's the only extra employee that Dan has indicated. We're looking pretty good. Of course, the salaries also include the 10% that for our current employees that we've talked about before. So that's the big one. Something else that you'll notice down here that's highlighted is this cash reserve. We didn't put that up in transfers. It could be generally up there in a transfer to go somewhere else. That is kind of an emergency fund, and Dan was talking about potentially having to repair an engine. Didn't really have a cost estimate at this point, but we've been having some problems with an engine at the power plant. So I moved that $100,000 into that cash reserve. It's basically there to use as you need, and that's exactly what it's for. It's an emergency type expense. I talked to the auditors about that, and it's okay to do that in these funds, in the utility funds that are generating revenue. So that's what I did, and that's the intent. If it doesn't get spent, then it just it doesn't get spent. So, but it's there if you have that expense come up. Let's see. So that, I want to look at the expenses real quick here. I don't think there was anything that I highlighted in the utility fund because, like I said, everything is pretty consistent in that fund. With the increases that you've done with the general fund, the things that we're going to need, what I'm probably going to do is the cash carryover that we show for 2027 is going to be that $328,000 down at the bottom. That'll just decrease a little bit. That won't be that much because I'm going to increase the transfers out of this fund into the general fund. Probably. I'll show you our other options are the refuse fund and the sewer fund, but this is the one that has the most flexibility. So that's where I'm going to increase the transfers, just so you know, because you're not going to see that till I bring this back to the meeting in July. But then you're going to see those transfers increased here and increased into the general fund. Okay.
Talking about line clearing, is that where we need to?
Yes, actually, that could also be. Jen, how much do you think that? You didn't have an idea on that engine. It's hard to say, but yes, you're absolutely right.
We're gonna keep on our yearly or other year, other year type of maintenance to keep lines cleared.
Do you remember which line item that was paid out of by any chance?
It was 15,000, even so.
Yeah.
No, except we could have paid it out of some that we already paid. Do you remember what it? I'll just go look.
Well, I'm looking at all the categories here. What would make the most
I didn't know if
sense?
the miscellaneous at 16,100 estimate for,
Could have been.
that was what that was.
Let me just go look, my computer's still.
No, we didn't have anything that high in miscellaneous. If you look at the breakdown over here, in the spreadsheet part, I'm looking for something that had 15,000 in it.
Right here.
Was that this year?
Mhm.
Okay. Could be this plant outside, maybe. No. I'm gonna say I'll bet that was paid out of plant outside, and the reason I say that, if you look at that line item, it was around 21,000, 20,000, then 12,000, and then in 2024 it jumped up to 43,000. I'm not really sure what that was last year, and it's been 18,000 this year. We usually budget that one pretty high. I've got 45,000 for 2026, so I feel like if that's where it was paid out of, you're going to be okay. 45,000, because that's historically, and I did that because of whatever that was in 2024.
so this year we just paid it out of that line item that's called plant outside electric and
Ta-da.
Good or what?
kind of feel like though, if this is gonna be, well, tell me what you think. Well, so sometimes our codes in the utilities gets a little confusing, in my opinion, but I don't plead with it. But I wonder if they're gonna start maintaining or trying to do this every year, every other year, I wonder if we should have something for line clearing or something. I don't know, what do you think? Well, it doesn't matter, I mean, we can add that in our general ledger later, but.
We can, I was just telling them I budgeted that high. I budgeted it at 45,000 this year, and that's based on whatever happened last year. It was 43,000, but in years past, it had been 20,000, 12,000. This year it's been 18,000, but I budgeted it high because of whatever happened last year, and so I kept it at that. I feel like that's gonna be sufficient to cover these expenses that we're talking about, plus anything else that comes out of that.
And you're saying whatever happened last year during the budget preparation?
No, that's what it was
Actual
actually spent,
expenses, Actuals, yeah, plan outside was 43.
but I didn't look at that to see what that was.
That would be interesting to look at.
It would be,
That was in 2024
yeah. But I do feel like you're gonna be okay. I can increase it if you'd like.
I was just with Jen, I don't know if we need to kind of, if we're gonna do this on a regular basis.
You'll have a better idea than when you do this, then the next year, you'll have a better idea and make adjustments in your budget that year. You've got, like I said, you've got a lot of flexibility in this fund because it's the utility fund. Okay, I'm gonna leave that where it is, and I'm gonna look into that, because now I'm curious, and I'll let you guys know what that was in 2024. Okay, isn't this fun? The rest of this, I mean, I don't have anything highlighted. I tried to highlight anything I thought you guys might have questions about, but again, everything's pretty consistent. You can tell your revenue's really close to the same. Your expenses aren't significantly more this year than the estimate for 2025. I think I've got it really good. So if you have any questions, I'll be sure to ask. Okay, we're gonna move on. Sewer fund. So this is a really simple fund as well. There's not a lot that goes, the revenue is just the collections from the sewer. The expenses are up a little bit, just because 10%, I think we're paying, no, it's the refuse fund that we've made a change in, but this pretty consistent across the board with the salaries. One thing I want to mention is Dan had talked about sewer cleaning, which happens every 5 years. So you don't have to budget for it this year, but if you guys keep this book, you maybe want to write in there that when you get ready to do your 2027 budget for your sewer expenses for sewer cleaning. When we did this in 22 and 23, the cost was $24,700 in each of those years. So you'll want to make sure that that is budgeted in there is a line item for sewer expenses. And so you're gonna wanna make sure that, so you can actually see that in 22 and 23, it was 35,000 and 33,000 for total expenditures on that line item. That's where you're gonna wanna budget high in those years. I'm actually budgeted pretty high for 2026, and I don't think I need to be looking at this. And I did that because I wasn't sure what those were, but when Dan mentioned sewer cleaning day, that's exactly what that was. So if you wanted to do sewer cleaning next year, you probably could, because I've got it in the budget for 2026 as well. I'll just leave it there, because if it doesn't get spent, it'll just carry over to the next year. Okay. Any questions on the sewer fund? refuse fund. You can see a little bit of an increase in personal services salaries. That's because Jarrett pretty much drives the trash truck, and he does that 2 days a week. So he was only being paid 20%, I think, of his salary out of refuse, and I bumped that up to cover the 2 days that he's actually doing the work out of this fund. And the rest of he's being paid, I think, out of streets. But it balanced it a little bit better. So that's what you see there is that increase for who's actually driving the trash truck. We have operating transfers coming out of here also. We had some over there on the sewer I forgot to mention. Those would be, if I get ready to do those transfers into the general fund, those are the 3 funds I'm gonna look at: utilities, sewer, and refuse. And I'll look at which one makes the most sense it depends on how much it turns out that I have to increase the transfers, and which one that it has the least impact on, and that's where I'm gonna move the funds from. And then when we get together and talk about the final budget, I'll let you know where that happened. So it's just a matter of moving the funds. Does that make sense? Unless you have a preference where you want it to come out of. Okay. Tourism and convention, down below the refuse, that one, that's just the guest tax fund. That's where we get the money for that. That can only be used to promote tourism in your community, or conventions if you have them. So kind of limited on what you can spend it on. Advertising we used to do, I don't know if you still do, but advertising in those magazines for the city, that would come out of this fund. Okay. The non-budgeted funds page, this just shows you all of your non-budgeted funds, like the capital improvement, equipment reserve, infrastructure improvement, your street bond. Those are all funds that have money in them that you can spend. They're not budgeted. You don't have to account for how they're being spent year over year. These numbers that you're looking at are actual numbers from 2024, and that's all that's reported here. So this doesn't show anything that's going to come in with transfers or anything like that. This is just your actual numbers for 2024. So it doesn't show you your 2025 budgeted transfers. On that other page I gave you that had to do with the streets, that shows you what is budgeted currently to go into these funds in 2025. I do want to point out one thing on those transfers. We always wait till the end of the year to do the transfers, primarily to make sure we have the funds there to do the transfers that were budgeted. They don't necessarily have to go into the fund that you budgeted them for, but you cannot go over the amount that was budgeted. So the amount set, where it goes can change, but also those are funds to be spent in 2025 if you needed them. So let's say something in the general fund, you don't want the general fund to go negative. That general fund relies on transfers for part of its operation. So if you get September, October, and you are getting really low on cash in your fund, that's when you can do a transfer. We've had to do that once or twice before, where it got closer to the end of the year and we needed to move those funds before the end of the year. But that's the point of having them, is to use them if you need them during the year. I hope that makes sense. So, and then if they're not, then you transfer them in, and you've gone through the transfer process, so, and Jen knows how to do all that. So that's what that is. The very last page is the certificate page. I do need you guys tonight. This is just what it looks like right now. This is gonna change slightly with the changes that you guys made, but it won't be significant. But the thing I do need you guys to decide on is when you want to have you are gonna need an R&R hearing, because we're gonna exceed revenue neutral rate. And the budget hearing, we usually do them combined. We usually do them at a council meeting. I say we, you guys usually do them at a council meeting. My recommendation is the second meeting in August. The reason for that is, well, we have to have it done before October. The reason for choosing the second meeting in August versus the first is that gives me plenty of time to get it published in the paper and plenty of time to do it again if it gets missed the first time I send it in. So you wanna make, if you don't give yourself enough time and you only allow for one publication and it fails to get in the paper, then you've got a budget violation. So this gives me plenty of time to get it there. Is that okay with everybody, the second meeting in August? Okay. All right. The last, in the back here, just so you can see what it looks like, this is what I need to send to the county clerk by July 20th. After we have our July 14th meeting, at that meeting, I'll bring back this budget with all of the changes that you suggested, that you wanted to see. You're not gonna see all of these pages, you're only gonna see the budget pages. We'll take a final review, shouldn't take too long, and then you can approve to exceed the R&R, so I can send that off to the county. You don't actually approve the budget until the budget hearing, but what you are approving is basically exceeding the R&R, and you're approving the mill levy that's going to be levied. So at that point, you can still make changes to your budget as long as your mill levy doesn't increase, it can only go down. So you could still make changes if you felt the need to. I'm hoping that this will be an acceptable budget and you can move forward and it's done. So,
Great job.
thank you.
All of you did.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I didn't really help her, so.
No, she did not.
Yes, but-
Well, no, she did provide input.
Well, so here's the thing, it was just easier to let her come in, look at things. I do have quite a few changes, some journal vouchers that I need to make. Just some different things, we've had a little bit of, issues with the budget entry. So I've gotta figure out how to do a journal voucher for, budget adjustment, because it's not like it's a journal voucher. So it's just, her and I talked about it, and I just decided it was easier for her to look through everything, rather than trying to sit there and show me. I have enough of the understanding of the budget. She got the spreadsheets back in order, we'll get the corrections made.
Yeah.
It just was easier to do it that way, and so we kinda had a little internal audit on top of our regular audit, so we'll get the books back in order and move forward.
If you guys have any questions, if you take those home and you're looking at them and you have any questions on anything, just give me a call and I'll be happy to explain how I came up with what I did. You're welcome.
Thanks, Lila.
You're welcome. I don't wanna get this to wake up on.
A motion to adjourn.
Well,
Larry,
and,
Hale.
all right.